From a modern perspective, when you hear high heels, you probably connect this type of footwear to women. But actually, they have a very long history and interesting development over time. To begin with, high heels weren't originally intended for women at all. It turns out that, when it comes to heels, women are actually the late adopters. The real fashionistas on the heel front were men. When it comes to wearing heels, before and now the reasons were similar. Usually, had to do with a mix of power, status, and of course beauty. We didn't get into heels as a species because somebody wanted to feel more comfortable. We wore them and continue to wear them to look taller, more elegant, tower over our rivals, be the most prominent person on stage, and generally dominate the room. The idea of a high heel or platform shoe is actually ancient. One of the first traced high-level pieces of footwear in history belonged to actors in ancient Greece and were known as cotorni. They were flat shoes with wooden or cork bases up to 4 inches thick. However, these weren't worn off stage. They were actually meant as a kind of shorthand about the social class of various characters in Greek drama and comedy. The higher the heel, the more elevated the character. There's also evidence that ancient Egyptians used heels, like the Greeks, not for everyday use. Murals dating to around 3500 BC show them wearing their heels, which, again, were significantly high, flat platforms, for religious ceremonies. But historians still don't know what was the purpose of the heels in these ceremonies. One of the most convincing theories about how the high heel took over the world is that Persian riding shoes were their real source of the first trend. Persian art shows that many noblemen of the medieval Persian Empire wore heels as riding shoes, often in decadent materials and bright colors, to enable them to get a better grip on their stirrups. European royals were really impressed and took notice when a Persian monarch, Shahrbaz, came to tour European courts in the 1500s. The diplomatic gesture turned into a fashionable one, too. People saw the beautiful heeled shoes worn by the Shah and his entourage and decided to make them their own. During the Middle Ages, the closest to heels that were worn was wooden soles, called pattens. They were attached to expensive footwear when used outdoors. These soles elevated the shoe to keep it out of the mud and other street debris, and it is believed these were the inspiration for several styles of clogs. It wasn't until the 16th century when the heel became a part of the actual shoe. The idea of the heel actually being a female notion took a very long time to develop. The first registered noblewoman wearing heels was Catherine de Medici. Up until this moment, women were wearing only wedges. In 1533, when 14-year-old Catherine de Medici was preparing for her wedding to the future King of France, she felt direct competition with the Duke's taller mistress. Therefore she asked a cobbler to craft a 2-inch heel for her wedding day to boost her less than a 5-foot frame. The shoes were an astounding success, and Catherine was known as the woman who set the rage in Paris for high heels during the 16th century. However, this trend for women died with her and wasn't revived until the 18th century. High heels were associated with privilege in France. The footwear began to signify a dividing line between classes. The real fashion maven, and patron saint of the heel, was none other than our well-known King Louis XIV of France, otherwise known as the Sun King. He loved all things ornate. He was the one who made the seriously decadent Palace of Versailles his center of power. And the heel was just the thing he wanted to look even more elaborate. Standing at just 5 feet 4, he adopted it enthusiastically, often with up to 4 inches of a heel on his court shoes. He even developed a trademark of red-painted heels and ordered all male members of his court to dye their heels the same color. As the shoes caught on, and other members of society began donning high heels, elite members ordered their heels to be made even higher to distinguish themselves from the lower classes. Authorities even began regulating the length of a high heel's point according to social rank. Klaus Karl includes these lengths in his book Shoes: ½ inch for commoners, 1 inch for the bourgeois, 1½ inches for knights, 2 inches for nobles, and 2.5 inches for princes. As women took to appropriating this style, the heel's width changed in another fundamental way. Men wore thick heels, while women wore thin ones. However, in 1791, Napoleon put a ban on high heels to establish equality among the people of France. Short wedges and the spring heel, which was a single layer of leather, replaced the popular piece of fashion for decades. Shoes were barely elevated off the ground, and shoemaking focused on crafting comfort during this period. The New World wasn't fond of the heels either. Massachusetts Puritans banned high heels outright, thinking they were seductive and possible instruments of witchcraft. Preserved document from the 17th century shows a law in Massachusetts that announced that women would be subjected to the same treatment as witches if they lured men into marriage via the use of high-heeled shoes. The Victorians were actually the ones who really rediscovered the heel. High heels emerged again as the sewing machine became more accessible in the 1860s. Combining comfort, fashion, and variety was now possible, and the high heels spread to America as designers experimented with European fashion. Even with critics claiming the shoe as too sexually aggressive, the United States opened its first heel factory in 1888. With its overwhelming success and affiliation with high fashion, high heels were here to stay. It was at this point that men stopped wearing the heel. It had become a woman's shoe. Pin-up photography is commonly credited with making the high heel a popular, fetishized object, particularly during World War II, when men had photographs of girls in heels pinned up all over the battlegrounds of Europe. According to many fashion historians and sex anthropologists, this was the bit of history where humans really discovered the sexual pose heels created. In 1954, the first stiletto heel was invented by Roger Vivier for Christian Dior's fashion collections. Named after the Italian word for a thin dagger, the shoes were immediately taken as a serious sex symbol by Hollywood. In early 2000, the mania over heels, partially fueled by the Manolo-obsessed Carrie Bradshaw character on Sex and the City, boosted the search for new extravagant heels. And although boundaries continue to be pushed, this mania may have begun to dampen slightly. Health fears about the dangers of heels, which draw reports of damage to ankles, bones, muscles, and general balance, have given women a reason to think twice before reaching for the stilettos. What do you think? Did any of these facts surprise you? What else do you know that we missed in the video? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you next Sunday.